Okay, we're joined now by our second speaker who is dialing in from Singapore. So my colleague Simon's just going to get her on screen. And she will be delivering the Myanmar update for those of you who are in the room to hear about Myanmar. We had a fantastic Myanmar event earlier this morning, launching Gerard McCarthy's new book. So Gerard, congratulations on your book. Mo joined us briefly in that book launch session, but she's here to deliver the Myanmar update for our Politics in Action. So Mo, can I just check that you can hear me and that we can hear you?
I can hear you fine, Natalie. Can
Amazing.
You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. That's great. And if you wanted to start sharing your slides while I introduce you, that would be terrific. Thank you. Now, Mo is going to have to do her own time monitoring. So we're putting our trust in you, Mo, that you're going to stick to time and that we will have sufficient time at the end for questions. So let me introduce our second speaker, Mo Thuzar from the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies. Mo is a senior fellow at the IC's Yusof Ishak Institute, where she coordinates its Myanmar Studies program. Prior to this, she was the lead researcher in the IC's ASEAN Studies Centre, and previously she spent 10 years at the ASEAN Secretariat, where she headed the Human Development Unit. She's also a former diplomat, and she researched Myanmar's foreign policy implementation as part of her doctoral research at the National University of Singapore. So without any further ado, Mo, I'm going to hand over to you to deliver the Myanmar update for our Politics in Action. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And at the outset, may I express my deep thanks to all of you at the Sydney Southeast Asia Centre for inviting me to be part of this discussion, and also for kindly accommodating my request to participate virtually due to certain constraints I have. I'll try to keep to the time, and we can unpack some of the points that I provide as update later on in the question and answer, I hope. So before I start, of course, I always like to start with the context, because what's going on in Myanmar, of course, did not just suddenly pop up after the coup in 2021 February. And the pushback or the resistance that we see today happening in Myanmar is really because of the concern that long periods of military or authoritarian rule follow coups d'etats in Burma or Myanmar. And the pushback that we see is really out of concern that the coup in 2021 February will not bring yet another imposition of a long period of such authoritarian rule. And this is also due to the fact that the military has created a very privileged premier political position for itself. And the narratives that we see and hear today all have past parallels. The military, as you will have read and heard, likes to highlight that it is the only single organized entity protecting the country from disaster and disintegration, for maintaining law and order and stability, convening elections and transferring power to the winning party. So these are the kind of narratives that have been entrenched over decades of military or authoritarian rule. And we also need to bear in mind that the military has used different types of roadmaps or referendum processes to justify continued control. After the 1988 coup, for example, we saw this almost decades-long national convention process just to push through a military-drafted constitution and exclude some political stakeholders from that process. There was also a 7-step roadmap towards democracy in 2003 as a kind of response to diplomatic pressure, but that was also a very broad roadmap without specific timeline indicators. And after the 2021 coup, we've seen yet again another roadmap that purports to bring the country back to law and order and stability and convening elections. So there's quite a bit of distrust whenever we hear these narratives. So that's the context that I'd like to ground my update in. What can we say 3 years after the coup? Of course, what we see is the military's use of lethal force, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances, and the first judicial executions that happened in July 2021, in decades. These are all adding to the violations of human rights by the military, documented since the 2021 coup. which also sparked off nationwide protests, a coordinated civil disobedience movement, and very quickly a breakdown of the regime-controlled local administration apparatus in several parts of the country. And we also saw the emergence of interim or parallel legislative and executive entities months after the coup. And starting in September of 2021, there was this People's Defensive War in response to the military's violence and atrocities committed against unarmed civilians up to that point. The ethnic armed organizations, we use the acronym EAOs, have also added to the post-coup conflict landscape. Several EAOs who are aligned with the resistance forces against the military are also now referred to as ethnic resistance organizations. And of course, the word resistance there refers to the resistance against the military, the Myanmar military. I think most of the attention on the current conflict dynamics in Myanmar has been focused since late October 2023 on the rapid progress of Operation 1027 that was launched in northern Shan State by a group of EAOs. And its rapid progress basically saw the kind of like retaking or recapture of significant border points, border towns, and so on. And Operation 1027 also inspired successive similar operations launched in Rakhine State, here in the northwest of the country, up to the border with India, and also in Kachin State, further up north, and most recently in Kayin State on the border with Thailand. And all of these different offensives launched by the EAOs, EROs, have also further changed the conflict dynamics in Myanmar. I'd just like to quickly refer people to this conflict map where you see the different areas of contestation for dominance, be it clashes with the SAC forces or with military groups, ethnic armed groups that are aligned with the SAC military regime, as well as those that are resisting the military regime. For more details, I would refer people to check out the Institute for Strategy and Policy Myanmar's report at this link. Responses to the coup, 3 years on, what do we see? We've seen international and ASEAN responses emphasize upholding the 2020 election results, which had actually given a second mandate to the National League for Democracy civilian government. There have been increased calls for respect for human rights and ceasing violence, all of which have not been heeded by the State Administration Council military regime. And we've also seen more vocal condemnation of the Myanmar military's use of lethal force against unarmed civilians, including in various ASEAN meetings at senior levels as well. There have also been targeted as well as diplomatic sanctions. These have increased and expanded since the coup. Interestingly, and because I monitor ASEAN's responses closely, there's been an unprecedented diplomatic type of measure that ASEAN instituted by barring the State Administration Council regime principals, such as the senior general and his appointed ministers, his political appointees, from attending ASEAN summits. And this was since October 2021, when Brunei held the ASEAN chair. And that criterion has been expanded to include foreign ministers' meetings starting February 2022 under Cambodia's rotational chairmanship of ASEAN. And that's continued up to today. So only a non-political representative is welcomed or invited to high-level ASEAN political meetings, such as summits and foreign ministers' meetings. In terms of measures to try to coordinate ASEAN's regional response to the Myanmar crisis, there is a 5-point consensus that the 9 ASEAN heads of state and government negotiated with the senior general in April 2021. And ASEAN continues to maintain that this is its main reference for the regional response to the Myanmar crisis. But of course, what's become more clear as time wears on is that the 5-point consensus in 2021 could not have and did not anticipate or could not have prepared for the spiral of violence that has erupted in Myanmar since May 2021 onwards. And of course, we also see differing approaches to the regional response. Maybe we can unpack that later. I think why it's important to look at what's happening in Myanmar and care about it is because there are very serious socioeconomic consequences and impacts from the coup. What I've summarized here, of course, is the kind of the challenges and the struggle that people face daily. Incomes have fallen, poverty has risen. There's a very uncertain economic environment due to the military regime's policy changes, as well as due to the spiral of conflict in the country. Several major foreign investors have either left, are suspending operations, or planning to leave. And there's an erosion of jobs, livelihoods, and real incomes. Recent updates from the UN resident coordinator in Myanmar have highlighted that there are 3 million people internally displaced since the coup, and close to 20 million of that in need of humanitarian assistance. Easily 1/3 of that are children. And let's not forget the mounting number of people crossing borders fleeing conflict, including the Rohingya refugees who fled conflict, crackdown against them in 2017 by the Myanmar military. And there's been an enforcement of the military service law, which mandates conscription. That has caused widespread panic among young people who are concerned for their safety, because conscription occurring at a time of conflict just creates more uncertainties and of course their future prospects. At the same time, humanitarian assistance delivery efforts are also constrained or hampered by the military regime's insistence that it has to be coordinated through a local partner. So there's very little opportunity for the kind of direct or coordinated, internationally coordinated assistance that we saw in the past in Myanmar. I'll end with this slide about realities today. It's a summary of the attitudes and the experiences of different stakeholders. If we look at the Myanmar military and the military regime, the State Administration Council, even though the military was humiliated with the Operation 1027's rapid success and following offensives, the military still maintains its unbroken mindset as the guarantor of stability. It is still asserting an election rhetoric as a sort of its exit ramp. If we look at the ethnic armed organizations, since October 2023, we've seen them gain unprecedented visibility as legitimate actors and stakeholders in the current dynamic in Myanmar. If we look at the resistance forces, the National Unity Government is the broad representative voice for the international community, for external interlocutors, to convey the sentiments of a diverse coalition of entities and forces resisting military rule. The NUG is also trying to seek political cohesion and to coordinate with the different ethnic resistance organizations, building on their capacities and strengths. And there are also inclusive processes and entities such as the National Unity Consultative Council and the People's Assembly, which pursue the political roadmap under a federal democracy charter that was announced in March 2021 by the interim legislative and executive bodies. But of course, the realities, the daily struggles that people face are very real and challenging. As I mentioned, widespread job shortages, rising commodity prices, electricity outages and fuel scarcity, fears of conscription, as well as fears of being accused as spies or informants. And of course, the plight of the women is never easy. Women face additional challenges and safety concerns with regard to abuses, either on the battlefield or as a result of conflict. I hope I've kept within the time. I'll stop here and happy to unpack any broad points from the update. Over back to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Mo. You have well and truly kept to the time, which we really appreciate, and you've also managed to fit a lot of information into your presentation. So I will open it up to the floor for questions now. Just pop your hand up and your name first and then your affiliation and your question. So one here, and then if you could pass the mic behind you once you're done, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. Paul Simidas, University of Sydney. You didn't mention Aung San Suu Kyi. Is she a spent force, or how would you rate her continued impact on Burma politics?
Just behind you. Yeah. Over to you, Mo.
Right. Shall I take the questions one by one, or shall I get a composite selection?
We can go straight to the next question if you like, and if you want to do them together.
Yep. Yeah, Kane Wilson.
I could take about a couple of questions, two to three questions, and then try to provide composite answers.
Lovely. Let's do two. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, Kane Wilson, independent researcher. We have some connection to the resistance forces in Myanmar here in Australia. I was also going to ask about Aung San Suu Kyi, just in terms of any reports of her well-being or any status regarding her safety and security. And the second aspect I wanted to ask about was, assuming there is success with the resistance forces, what do you see as the exit strategy for the military, the people in power in the military, or oligarchs that are extended from the military?
So those questions go together quite well. I'll let you address those, Mo. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those two very important questions. And I do have to apologize for not being able to, I think, highlight that point about Aung San Suu Kyi in the update slides. Of course, she was among the first that the military rounded up when the coup happened on the 1st of February 2021. And she has remained under detention, and of course with the ridiculous prison charges slapped on her, she also is serving out close to a 3-decade-long combined prison sentence, which is very, very different from the treatment that previous military regimes gave her. She's never served a prison sentence. She's never been charged with so many violations or offenses before. In the past, she was serving house arrest, which meant it was in her residence with access, albeit restricted, to her from different members, various members of her party, and so on. So it's very different in the way that the military is really trying to marginalize her relevance, as well as that of her party, the party that she leads, the National League for Democracy. I've written some research papers together with colleagues on that, which we call the military's anti-NLD project. And we've seen this as something that the military has been really building up since the previous military regimes. So they're really trying to, I think, limit or curtail her relevance, because I think as all of us in the audience will also be aware, maybe one word from her may really have an impact, or people will really try to give, put an interpretation to that and all. So what we've seen, of course, is that even when there are these rigged court appearances, her legal team can only have access to her before these court appearances, and there's a gag order also on her legal team with regard to giving comments to the media and so on. And information access, communication access from her family members has also been limited until recently, but even then it's been in the form of letters and rather than telephone calls and so on. So my rough assessment here is, of course, the military, I think, wants to kind of like keep her as this quote-unquote perfect hostage, to borrow a term from a book by Justin Wintle some years ago, in the sense that they probably still see her as a bargaining chip of sorts. We've seen them try to use her to ease off diplomatic pressure from ASEAN by engineering meetings with Aung San Suu Kyi and, say, the former deputy prime minister / foreign minister of the Prayut Chan-o-cha government in Thailand in 2023 and so on. So I think we need to see that in that sense. I wouldn't say that she is a spent force. Definitely, she will always have a role, as a revered role. But what we have seen since 2021 also is that the resistance that has sprung up and has been coordinated has continued without her direct guidance and intervention, although drawing inspiration from her. So I think that's something new that we've seen also about the dynamics continuing despite the leader or the chair of the National League for Democracy and the senior leader in the government being behind bars. The second question about assuming there is success by the various resistance forces, what might be the exit strategy for the military? I think that's one of the different scenarios that we can look at, because currently, of course, what we're seeing is this kind of continued impasse with a very much of a downward slope for the State Administration Council military regime. But the military still seems to be trying to hold on, hang on, and by the skin of its teeth or fingernails or whatever. So the big question here is whether or not the State Administration Council actually is willing to change or even whether there is a possibility for some kind of diplomatic pressure to be placed on the SAC to change unwillingly. That's the big question mark there, because up to this point, the military's rhetoric, the SAC's rhetoric is they view the resistance forces as quote unquote terrorists. They have employed such language to pinpoint these entities as entities that they do not want to engage in dialogue with, and they're trying to set conditions for any efforts to mediate or to even start thinking about dialogue. So there is that question about whether the SAC can be brought to consider changing willingly or unwillingly, and at what level that can start happening. And of course, the longer stretch that we need to consider also here is the resistance. It's a broad and diverse coalition, and as I mentioned, of course, there are these interim executive and legislative entities which are also seeking to coordinate and have a coherent approach together with the various ethnic resistance organizations who also have their own objectives and their own grievances against the military. So whether that we can also see, within the resistance, this more cohering and coordinated strategy moving forward, especially in terms of the relations between the NUG and the ethnic armed groups, the ethnic resistance organizations, is something that I'm continuing to monitor.
Thank you, Mo, for such a comprehensive response. Okay, we have another hand up right in the middle here. Lydia, if you can get the mic there. Just bear with us, Mo. And I think this might be the last question, but I'd also like to add a question, if I may, about whether, if there's time, if you could elaborate on the different attitudes in ASEAN towards the regional response. That might be helpful. But over to our questioner.
Hi, Mo. Rahman from Lowy Institute. I understand the foreign currency reserve of the Myanmar government now. I mean, it was $7 billion before the coup. It has dropped now to about 3.3 billion US dollars. 1.3 of them is in the US. So as the foreign currency reserve keep being depleted, I'm wondering whether this will be a factor that may influence the junta to start to negotiate or to find a way out diplomatically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Natalie. Shall I start the answer?
Yes, please go ahead. Yeah.
Right. Rahman, you always ask great questions. And I think, my good friend and research colleague, Professor Sean Turnell, might have better insights also on that. But I think what we're looking at as the coup wears on into past its third year, going into the fourth now, is whether or not the economy and these financial foreign exchange woes might prove to be one of the straws that adds to the SAC's straining back. So we're looking at that because what we've seen, and in the summary slides I highlighted just now, is the dire economic consequences after the coup and the military regime's policy changes, mainly with regard to trying to get access to foreign exchange amidst the restrictions that have been placed on it, do show that it's the economy. But whether or not that is going to be a sufficient factor to actually compel the military to start thinking about its exit strategy, I think, will also depend on other factors, because, as I mentioned, it still seems to be holding on. And then there are also, I think, ways that the military tries to find as a runaround to the foreign exchange, the foreign reserve freezes, or the financial sanctions that are placed on it. And to address your question, Natalie, the differing approaches of the different ASEAN members, I think this is something that is a point of concern, because although ASEAN speaks with one voice and still tries to uphold the collective regional decisions, such as the non-political representative criterion, we've also seen individual ASEAN members attempt to approach the Myanmar question in a different way, particularly countries that have borders with Myanmar and that also have significant business and economic interests in Myanmar. I'll just quickly maybe summarize that in the form of the findings of the State of Southeast Asia survey. The findings for this year really show that regionally, ASEAN people in ASEAN are in agreement that it is really the SAC's intransigence that is holding up the process, and that includes respondents from Myanmar. There are also views that the the 5-point consensus is fundamentally flawed, and that also there are views that the 5-point consensus exposes ASEAN disunity. A point to note here is that responses from Thailand actually were double the regional average of this view that the 5-point consensus exposes ASEAN disunity. And we have to remember here that Thailand, under the previous Prayut Chan-o-cha government, was the country that was most active in initiating and organizing Track 1.5 meetings with the SAC military regime in Myanmar, involving also other neighbors such as China, India, Bangladesh, and Laos. And we do see a much more active voice and tone being taken by the current Srettha administration in Thailand with regard to imaginations of coordinating a Myanmar response. And there are also views among the different ASEAN members that the 5-point consensus still continues to be suitable under the current circumstances, although that's not the majority view. Interestingly, however, the 2022 chair country for ASEAN, Cambodia, feelings in Cambodia actually are double that. I mean, they feel that the 5-point consensus is still the most suitable under the circumstances. But I think what we need to note here is that by and large, responses in ASEAN overall seem to tend more towards staying neutral or not having a view, and that worries me.
Yeah.
So there are all these differing attitudes and so on, undoubtedly based on, I think, different national priorities and exigencies. And of course, the Myanmar crisis is one among many other geopolitical concerns that ASEAN countries or people in ASEAN countries feel are important for their own existence and their national priorities.
Thank you,
Maybe
Mo.
I'll stop here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to stop and to end on. And I would like to thank you for your comprehensive update and for your generosity joining us online today. I'm very glad it all worked seamlessly and great to have such an engaged audience. So could you please join me in thanking Mo Thuzar?
My pleasure. And if there are any follow-up questions, I'm most happy to address them via email.
Thank you so much, Mo. Okay.